National divorce? Let's get dialed in. Hello and welcome to Texas Talkin, where we tackle the big questions that everyone else is afraid to ask out loud. Like, what do you do when half the country wants to cancel each other and the other half is too busy yelling at you on social media? Well, today we have an answer that's, let's just say, unconventional. We're talking about something called national divorce. Now, no, this isn't Dr. Phil. There are no crying couples or shouting matches, but it just might be crazier. While many of us are hopeful that last week's election of Donald Trump, along with control of the Senate and House, will mean sweeping changes, accountability, and a complete annihilation of the deep state, there are others who are convinced red states and blue states have too many irreconcilable differences. Our guest tonight is Jason Fry, author of National Divorce, A Plan for Peace. Now, this isn't some light bedtime reading. It's a book that says, hey, maybe we should consider what happens when the blue states and red states finally admit they're more incompatible than oil and water. According to Jason, it's time to consider a peaceful split, a big one, where each half of the country just calls it quits, packs up, and takes their political baggage to their own side of the map. Think of it like this. What if California and Texas went their separate ways? Imagine a world where New York could have as many taxes and regulations as they want without giving Florida a headache. A place where the people who want to abolish cars or identify as cats could go to one corner, and those who want to drive trucks and shoot guns could go to the other. It's kind of like a political dream team, except everyone finally gets their own team. Now, of course, the idea sounds extreme, but look around. We're already at a point where Thanksgiving dinners are battlegrounds, friendships fall apart over voting habits, and people break up over which cable news channel they watch. Jason says maybe it's time for a clean break, a little like conscious uncoupling, but on a national scale. So today, we're going to find out just how serious this is and whether a national divorce could actually work. How would it happen? What does it mean for everyday Americans? And most importantly, is this the key to restoring a little peace? Or are we just diving into the political experiment of the century? Joining us next, the author himself, Jason Fry. Get ready. This could be one of the wildest interviews we've had yet. And joining me now is the author of National Divorce, A Plan for Peace, Jason Fry. Jason, welcome to Texas Talkin. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, glad to be here.
So let's get to the heart of the matter, the question that I know everyone is asking when they see the words national divorce, and that is, how would a national divorce actually happen? And what does it look like?
Right. So I knew, regardless of how the outcome of the election was, that 47% of the United States was going to be grumpy, right? It's pretty guaranteed. So I had this idea that if we know it's going to be a conflict, if we know that there are already divisions in American politics and life, why don't we make a plan for that? And so that's where the book is coming from. I think that when you don't make a plan, things go poorly, right? So what the plan looks like to me is that we come to the table and talk and say, California, y'all are kind of crazy over there from my perspective. You want abortions on the street corners and whatever all else. We don't want that in Texas. And California, I think, would say the same thing. We don't want a government that does half of the things that Donald Trump says he's going to do. We want something else. And so my thought was, if we already are, to use the metaphor, headed towards divorce, if we're already sleeping in separate bedrooms and running separate bank accounts, but we're still kind of married, right? We're probably at that point where maybe we ought to figure out how to get out of this thing as a responsible step.
So in figuring out how to get out of this thing and, rolling out some sort of plan where there are blue states and red states and each have its own sovereign governments, what would that look like? I mean, I know there are movements like Texas Nationalist Movement, for instance,
Yep.
that have spelled out, this plan for Texas. But if it's done on a much larger scale like this,
Hmm.
there are so many unanswered questions as
There are
far as
very, very many.
spell it out for me.
Yeah. So in my mind, blue can't secede because blue isn't a political unit, right? Red can't secede because there's no red government, right? So states, on the other hand, do have formed governments and well-functioning legislatures and governors and all the things. So from that perspective, it makes sense that a particular state, any particular state, could vote to leave or stay in the union at a given time. So what that looks like to me is a legislative process. So in Texas, we don't have a referendum process. So there's no way to just put a question on the ballot without some kind of other legal authorization. So the Texas plan, and coincidentally the New Hampshire plan, is to file a bill in the legislature, get it passed through the regular channels to authorize this vote. The vote then authorizes some negotiations. So when the vote passes, we send our guys upstairs and say, guys, we'd like to leave now. Here's a list of 36 things that we need to work out, right? And you go from there. You start a negotiation process. Now, other states like California do have a referendum process already in their existing law. So they may be able to take a little bit different approach, but still be legal and within the bounds of their law.
So, how might a national divorce impact everyday Americans?
Mm-hmm. So I think about it like a little bit like European Union or some of the other large groups of countries, right? We speak a common language mostly. We have a history that's sort of in common, even though there are definite cultural differences between regions. And so there is no reason that we couldn't put together some sort of a free trade agreement in the negotiations, right? Where travel is fine. You may not have to have a visa to go visit your grandma that lives in another state, right? We may not have to have special government permits to trade Texas oil for Iowa corn, for example. Again, it all comes down to what kind of a free trade and free travel agreements can be negotiated out of the deal.
So, in your book, do you outline what that might look like as far as, obviously not a centralized military anymore, no federal subsidies, which
Right.
there are arguments for and against that. The geography itself, you don't really have a concentration of blue states, right? You've got the coastal elites on the left coast, and it's aptly named left. And then in the Northeast, you have this conglomeration of blue states. And then sometimes, and I say sometimes because of what happened last week, you have these upper Midwest states that are blue. And then sort of this sore thumb sticking out in the mountain west of Colorado and New Mexico. So how would that geographically align, if at all?
It becomes negotiable. So I believe that a state can secede. I don't believe that 7 states should get together and say we're all out together. That may happen as different places go and we figure out who our new friends are going to be, right? But to me, those large blocks, the middle, the Northeast, the far West, those blocks could be sustainable countries, at a third or a half of the United States fairly easily. Now let's talk about size, though. Nobody says that Monaco and Liechtenstein have no right to exist because they're too small, right? So on the world stage, there are countries as small as Rhode Island. So for even our smallest state to become an independent nation on the world stage would not make them an outlier, really, in terms of all the other nations in the world.
So Republicans, Jason, will control the White House, the Senate, and probably the House. Shouldn't we pump the brakes for a minute and determine what can be accomplished over, say, the next 2 years or 4 years, and then maybe revisit the topic? What are your thoughts on that?
2 takes on that. One, I'm not convinced that either party is really going to shrink the deficit, is really going to keep us out of war.
Well, their track record of not doing that speaks for itself.
Correct. They may say, but I have no reason to expect, that we'll go from whatever it is, 32 trillion down to nothing in a term, or I don't really expect that we'll go from having military bases in 80 or 90 other countries down to one, the United States, in a term, right? So, again, immigration is a hot one, sure. But if there's 20 million people, you're not going to get rid of 20 million people or keep them. You can't even sort out 20 million people in one term, right? So the issues are just too big, and the trajectory is too far gone. I mean, we are too far down the slippery slope to recover that. Even it would, say the Republicans do pull off their trifecta, they're guaranteed that for only 2 years until we got to go.
That's why
again.
I said 2 years,
they cannot pull
or
that
4
off
years.
in 2 years. So that's one angle. Here is I'm not convinced that we're not going to end up there anyway. Okay. The next angle too, though, is that I'm not convinced that it's a Republican issue, right? I think the left is as fired up about Donald Trump being terrible as we are about government overregulation and overreach.
Marxism.
Oh, yeah. So they are as fired up about how terrible things are as we are for different reasons, right? So to me, if Harris wins, the Texans get mad and our secession cause goes forward. If Trump wins, the Californians get mad and our secession cause goes forward, because the ultimate goal is really smaller, more homogenous governments that actually suit our preferences, right?
Well,
I want California
and
to have it their way.
Yeah, and I'm sure California wants to have it their way,
sure
just like we in Texas really wanted to have it our way these past 4 years during the Biden regime. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this subject, and that is the ideological polarity that we see. In other words, the division right now between the leftists and then the more traditional conservatives and MAGA conservatives. And it does seem that there's such a disparate reality among those two groups of people. In other words, the worldview is so different that I wonder sometimes, can one side win the argument? Can one side move the needle to where the other side finally acquiesces and sort of understands that we're never going to be a woke Marxist country? Or perhaps on the other hand, if they got control, which is what I was afraid may happen prior to last week, how far are they going to take it? They've already completely weaponized the justice system, lawfare, going after people they disagree with, using the so-called wheels of justice to do that. So there are so many different possibilities of what we should do, what we can do, what's feasible, what's not. I just wonder how realistic something like national divorce would be. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene has talked about it. Of course, you've got various movements across the country, but they never seem to really gain any real traction. So what would you say, Jason, is the best next step forward?
So the best next step is to envision what does your ideal world look like, right? And try to work towards that. But here's the caveat. Here's where I take a different angle than many people. You talked a lot about taking control of the government and forcing your way on the others. And we are at an intractable position there. Every time the red team is in charge, they force some things.
The blue team goes nuts, and
and every time the blue team's in charge, they force some stuff, right? Absolutely, we go nuts. So the point is, the problem is really using the levers of power to control the culture or to have it your way, right? So to me, the solution is let me have it my way over here, and I'll leave you alone, and you can have it your way over there. So if the Northeast and California want to become Scandinavian socialist republics, okay, cool, do it over there.
Not here.
If Texas wants to be something different than that, cool, let us do it over here. So the key really is the lack of use of force, the lack of coercion. You talked about lawfare. Like, we have to agree not to jack with each other, not to mess with each other at that level. Again, I come in kind of libertarian in the book, that non-aggression is really the key to the whole thing. So a divorce, for example, doesn't cause a murder. Okay, people don't always get along, but there's this expectation that during the process, even if you're very angry, nobody's going to kill each other, right? I think that's why I like the metaphor.
Usually not.
Usually not, and if they do, that's wrong,
right?
But in this case, the first thing the left will say is, well, how'd that work out for you last time? We already had a civil war.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same argument as saying, well, I beat you last time you tried to leave, so I'm going to beat you again. It's just a threat of violence. That's not okay.
No, it's not. It's certainly not. The other question that comes to mind for me, and Ron Paul was asked about this several years back on the question of secession, and he is convinced that it wouldn't work because you would still have these centers of power in places like Austin, in our case here in Texas, for instance, which is arguably just as corrupt, perhaps even more so
at
than
least
DC.
as corrupt.
So,
Correct.
so how would you respond to that, Jason?
Two answers to that. One would be proximity, right? So I have a better chance of electing someone from Texas to go to Austin that I can talk to. Have you ever tried to reach your national representatives lately?
I've had about as much luck trying to reach a national representative as I have my state representative.
Well, your state representative, if I recall, is somebody that thinks he's special.
Yes, yes, you know damn well who it is.
I do, and that's part of the problem is that guys like that. But you get my point. So you, though, living in his neighborhood, have a chance of meeting the guy on the street and looking.
We sometimes literally cross paths at mass on Sundays. So
exactly.
To your point, I mean,
that is never going to happen
no.
with me and somebody in Washington or California or New Hampshire or wherever.
Yeah, DJT is not coming to Beaumont to go to mass. To your point
Probably
about
not feeling it.
being further removed. So in other words, I'm hearing you
so
correctly.
that's a piece of the answer is that I cannot just pick up my daily life and run up to Washington, D.C. to go have a meeting with some bureaucrat, right? I can a little easier go to Austin or even Houston, right? I think that proximity makes them more reachable.
Responsive.
Yeah. Another angle is that it takes truly large governments to do truly terrible things, right? So I say there is no world war if there are no world powers, right? So by breaking it up into smaller clusters, I mean, yeah, Austin can still be Austin,
swampy,
but they're closer, and
yes, they are.
They won't have the authority in the state of Texas to do totally crazy things because we're breaking it down into smaller units.
Your book is available for viewers to purchase on Amazon. The book
is.
Is there another? Go ahead.
Yeah. If you think Jeff Bezos needs another yacht, Amazon is a perfectly good place to get that. I would like you to get it from me at national-divorce.com.
We'll put that up on the screen for viewers.
So national-divorce.com or Amazon if you want an electronic Kindle version, things like that. I'm working on an audiobook, not quite there yet, but it is available.
The book is called National Divorce, A Plan for Peace. Jason, thank you for the provocative and interesting conversation. I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Texas. Stay dialed in to interviews and content just like this by clicking that follow button on my Facebook page, or hit the subscribe button to learn more about exclusive access that you won't want to miss.